I do think that IFS and these other parts works traditions have something of incredible value to offer to more traditional shamanic and psychedelic work. And that's that the psychotherapeutic approach can sort of clean the basement. You we deal with all these parts and the trauma from the personal lifetime, and then we can open to those deeper realms in a much better way.
Well, Bob, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, great to be here.
I guess I reached out to you because, well, I haven't covered internal family systems on the podcast yet. And you're one of the only people who's an IFS practitioner who also is interested in shamanism and spirit possession and that kind of thing. So I found that really intriguing and wanted to dive into it with you.
Great, me too. I think there are a lot more like me, but they stay in hiding because you talk openly about this, you become a target.
Yeah, okay. I was looking through your bio, and you've got a whole interesting history before you became an IFS focused practitioner. And I wonder if you could just give us a bit of that journey, because I think it's really informed your approach to IFS, right?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. IFS. I believe that IFS is the most respectful and potent form of therapy available today for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think it's potent because it is respectful. I didn't used to put those two things together, but now I think being profoundly respectful in the world is a very, very potent and powerful way to be.
Yeah.
So my own history, extreme violence throughout my childhood, rape, beatings, sadistic sexual molestation from both parents, my older brother. My dad had his child molesting friends living in the house with us.
Oh.
Incredible nightmare. And we went to church every Sunday. Or profound lessons in hypocrisy.
Wow.
And then mom was institutionalized a few times, and it was always hushed up. Both of them were addicts. My brother killed himself when we were teenagers. My father was murdered a few years later. So by all odds, I should be dead, in prison, or living in a dumpster. And I actually, I've been working with other men with histories like mine for decades and decades. And my life has not been easy, but now I would say I'm primarily a joy-filled being. And
Yeah. Well, in kind of shamanic traditions, the initiation into becoming a medicine person or shaman is often extreme trauma.
yeah, and I studied shamanism a lot. My undergraduate degree was in anthropology with a specialization in the history of religions. So that was something that fascinated me from very, very early on. That and psychedelics were very, very, my early immersions into the inner world. And then I went through most of the kinds of inner work that I found helpful are some different variety of a parts work model. Like Jung's concept of complexes, I think, is the root of much modern parts work in the West. Then Roberto Assagioli's psychosynthesis, very explicitly parts work. The Watkins, Jack and Helen Watkins, ego state therapy. Gestalt therapy from Esalen. I live near Esalen, gone there many times. That's parts work. Transactional analysis was another one. Voice dialogue. I mean, there are many. And I think Pia Melody's, what she calls post-induction therapy, is a very sophisticated form of parts work for working with addictions. So there are many. And I think of IFS as sort of a culmination, but I don't think it's a final word by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. I've often thought that IFS was likely based on Jung's complex psychology, but I've never heard anyone talk about that explicitly.
Well, Dick did not study Jung, but they clearly are related profoundly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I've been developing over a number of years a kind of approach to parts work that, you're doing parts work in the context of a shamanic journey. So it's a kind of blend of depth psychology and shamanic practice.
Yeah, I think these fit together really well. From a Jungian perspective, you start looking into the inner world. What you meet first, almost always, is complexes, parts of us that were generated in our own personal lifetime. Then, as you start going deeper, you start meeting more archetypal things. Well, we have our own parts, our shadow. Then you start getting into archetypal things, usually archetypal mother, archetypal father. They're still quite human. You go further, you start meeting archetypes that are not human at all anymore. Mm-hmm. They're way bigger. You go toward the antipodes of the mind, and the flora and fauna get stranger and stranger and bigger and bigger. And that's very unpopular with modern Western intellectuals.
Yeah.
They ridicule it and do everything they can to shut people up. And, it ruins people's careers when they start talking about this. Mm-hmm. And I do think that IFS and these other parts works traditions have something of incredible value to offer to more traditional shamanic and psychedelic work. And that's that the psychotherapeutic approach can sort of clean the basement. We deal with all these parts and the trauma from the personal lifetime, and then we can open to those deeper realms in a much better way. So I think they combine rather than they shouldn't be at war with each other. They should combine with each other.
Yeah. And I think like what you're talking about when we go into the real like chthonic depths of the psyche and we meet these non-human entities or figures, I think, for me, that's where shamanism came in as really helpful to like, what are these things? How do I deal with them? I can't just sit down and have a discussion with a Komodo dragon or,
Learn to speak Komodo.
Yeah.
I had the great good fortune to study with Michael Harner himself, mm-hmm. and Sandra Ingerman and a bunch of others. Yeah, I think they're very, very helpful in exploring these farther reaches, and also psychedelics are incredibly helpful. As you can imagine, coming out of my childhood, I was on a railroad line that was headed towards severe alcoholism, binge drinking, in high school and all of that stuff. And what stopped that, what derailed that seemingly inevitable process was lots and lots of acid. I first started taking psychedelics in 1967. So probably well before most of your audience was born.
We skew older on this podcast.
Yeah, good. I want to say one thing, and it did. I did abuse alcohol later, but I was never on that hardcore addictive trail ever again. The psychedelics somehow just sort of wiped that out. And for many years, I didn't drink at all. We were hoping to meet God back then. It wasn't so much a psychotherapeutic focus, but mm-hmm. just the innate wisdom the psychedelics helped me and many others discover turned my life around. It was one doorway spirit could get in.
Yeah, I had a similar trajectory, but it wasn't until I started working intentionally with psychedelics in my early to mid 30s that it really created a profound shift. And like my first ayahuasca experience arrested my habitual drinking. It just stopped. I didn't have to try it. Just like the urge went away. And the reason why I got into psychology in a deeper way, beyond just kind of pop psychology or reading Jung's kind of lighter works, is because I wanted to understand, like, what happened there, because it wasn't clear to me. I had an experience. There was no, nothing came to me and said, you will stop drinking or anything like that. It's just like a switch got flipped. And so it's taken me years to kind of understand what was the catalyst for that change. So what do you think it was for you going into these experiences with LSD that created this shift for you?
My brilliant and profound answer is, I don't know.
Okay.
And, actually, I've largely, this is going to sound really goofy, I've largely stopped trying to answer questions like that. Because they're fascinating. And, like, what are these beings we meet at the antipodes of the mind? That's the first question I wanted to ask. And why? Who are you and why are you here? Those questions aren't so helpful.
And are you a part of me, or are you something outside of me? Or
that one I think we need to answer. But I've changed this, like, what ontological questions. I try to stop asking those and just stay with this sort of narrow focus. What can help the suffering human being in front of me? What pragmatically works to help this person? How can I help this, the tensions and pain be resolved? That's a very different question. And if I stay on that focus, I go in a very different question than, like, why did this work? Or, what happened? And who are these things? And, those are all fascinating questions. But the one I really want to answer is, how can I help people grow and reduce their suffering? So, and I consider it almost an ethical problem for me, because I'm so curious. Somebody comes to me, wants help with one of these things inside them. I have a contract with them. I'm here to help you, and I want to focus 100% of my efforts there. And it's not okay for me to get all curious and use them as a research subject and ask them questions about, no, I have to, and it takes a lot of discipline for me to stay with that focus, but I think it's been fruitful.
Yeah, I guess I've come to a similar place where I find it's just most helpful if we act as if these inner figures are real and have a life of their own. It seems to affect the engagement, the relationship with, the change. And yeah, because I don't think we can ever fully answer those ontological questions. People have been trying for centuries, and I found that just act as if, because that's what the experience is like, that they are real, that they are autonomous, that they have a voice and intention and things like that. Definitely.
Great way to put it, act as if. And I think a really key thing is that we treat them as persons, as full spectrum persons with agency, intention, will, intelligence, all that stuff. And, I'm a big fan of Martin Buber, who's not so popular anymore, maybe because he's so damn difficult to read. But, having an I-thou relationship with them, it also comes back to respect, why I thought IFS was so potent. And that was one thing Dick discovered early on. If he treated the parts of people as full sub-personalities with all the characteristics of a person, the therapy went better. And for many years, for decades, he said, well, we'll just stay with that. And then more recently, he said, no, these things are real, with their own subjectivity, their own memory trains, all that kind of stuff. And, there is some hardcore evidence for this with DID people and brain scanning and stuff like that, but I don't think it matters very much.
Yeah. Yeah, James Hillman was really helpful to me in terms of the approach of treating the inner figures as persons, and having respect for them, and trying to get to know them better, like allow them to become fleshed out through dialoguing and sticking. He would say, stick with the image or stick with the figure and see what it has to teach you about it, rather than interpreting it, putting it in a category,
Yeah.
And
I think the word dialogue you mentioned is super important. Dialogue, interact. Theories about them are just going to get in the way, no matter how brilliant. There was one thing they said in the Gestalt world that I really liked. You can talk to a part, you can become that part and talk as the part, but don't talk about the part. That's gossip. Nobody likes being gossiped.
Right. And it goes back to where you started with respect too. It's respecting these figures, like speaking to them as you would hopefully another, flesh and blood human in front of you. Yeah.
And I think some of them are vastly wiser than we are. Many of them. So maybe even a little extra respect.
A little humility.
Yeah. That unpopular virtue.
Yeah, one of the things that I haven't gone into IFS super deeply. It was part of a training that I did with Gabor Mate a few years back. But it was like really just kind of touching on the concept. And I thought, okay, I recognize this from the Jungian work and active imagination and things like that. And so I can see it has value. The one thing that made me skeptical of it is that it seemed like all the parts were kind of named and you just had to identify this constellation of the internal family within yourself. But it already came with like kind of names and categories and kind of processes around those. Now, let me know if that's just a kind of superficial understanding of the work, or enlighten me if that's maybe just a starting point.
Just a starting point at best. And there are people, and I will keep my big mouth shut and not make names, who do their IFS this way, names,
okay,
and roles. It's a big mistake. I think all the better practitioners treat everyone they meet as a full spectrum personality. And those labels like protectors, firefighter and manager, exiles, those are held very, very lightly. They just help a therapist navigate, hopefully without stepping on so many toes. And many, many people, Dick included, myself, I would never use those words with a client. They specifically started asking me about, where does this fit in the model? And even then I would encourage them, let's not go there. Let's just talk to the being,
Right. Yeah. Okay. Because I have had people come to me who have done some IFS work, and it's sometimes a bit jarring for me because they will be talking to me and be like, "Oh, my protector is here and is saying this, and my whatever is here," and I got a sense of a real kind of fractured personality. And what I would then try to do is like, go into dialogue with that part and find out what he, she, it wants to be called. What role does it play? So I guess that's something that certain practitioners will get into, but others will kind of stick to the system more rigidly.
Yeah, and there's some who, they're now a bunch of people, and there are several different versions of this. They're creating AI apps to put on your cell phone to do IFS therapy.
Oh no. Yeah.
I'm one of the companies has hired me as a consultant.
Okay, it would be interesting to see how that goes.
Well, yeah.
Can they make it so it's flexible and adaptive enough that it respects your kind of approach?
Maybe, and what I've said is we need to pair this with real human contact. Mm-hmm. And there's several models. I taught a lot overseas online, and I taught in China a fair amount. And this woman there has developed this model of supervised peer counseling using parts work. So that, because if you think about it, one-on-one therapy is just not going to work. At best, it's linear progression, assuming all the therapists are good. The human suffering is going up exponentially. These two curves, this is not good. It's not good now. It's going to get worse. We need something radically different. Mm-hmm. So this model of supervised peer counseling, I think, is very, because, you have some supervisors who are trained quite a bit, and they can supervise the peer counseling. Then you have more trained ones supervising the supervisors. You get 2 or 3 levels, you can reach hundreds of thousands of people instead of 10 as an individual therapist. So I think if we could pair this, this AI app with some kind of supervised peer counseling system, we could create something really, really powerful that could affect the huge numbers that need to be reached. But that's my hope anyway.
Hey, I want to take a moment to speak with you about this channel. Currently, only 11% of viewers are subscribed to the channel. I think those numbers are terrible. So if you're enjoying this content and you want to help out the channel, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe. And if you really want to help out the channel, you can become a member of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon, which will give you access to early release of full ad-free episodes, plus access to the archive of the first 100 episodes of this podcast. It would really help me out and allow me to keep creating content like the interview that you're watching right now. Okay, thanks so much. Now, back to the interview. Yeah, I guess in my little way, by combining the kind of parts work of like Jungian active imagination, imaginal psychology, archetypal psychology, whatever you want to call it, with the shamanic ritual, what I'm able to do is get a bunch of people in a room who are each going on their individual journey to connect with different aspects of themselves. And then the most profound thing about it has been the sharing afterwards, because people are often, they share a part of their journey and it resonates with someone else, and it opens up a whole kind of interpersonal connection that I think is like essential to the healing, especially now as we're like isolated individuals, right? And so the community connection, I think, is an integral part of like real healing.
Yeah, I've gotten really interested in the psychedelic churches. Even though there was one that shall remain nameless that seemed to be a total disaster area.
Oh, there's a number of them that are disasters, but there are some that work really well.
Yeah, and because I think this is a model that could reach enough people in a way, if it's well contained and supervised, that also would be legal. Because if the churches cross their eyes and dot their T's.
Well, your eyes will become crossed at some point, right?
Yeah. So, or that, and I work a fair amount with Northern Plains tribes, and they think this idea of healing one-on-one, the private closed room with somebody sort of crazy. Do it in groups. Yeah. And this wonderful lady, Dr. Melody Hayes, who's an MD professor at UCSF, and she was a big part of legalized plants, the plant medicine thing in Oakland. She says, when someone gets an illness, it's the community that has the illness, and that person's body is expressing it. And if we want to do fundamental healing, we have to go back to the community. Right. And the healing of the individual is essential to the wellness of the community. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. We're connected in ways we don't appreciate at all. Yeah. There's still so much, I think, that we can learn from indigenous peoples and their healing ways that is really not affected kind of the psychotherapy world enough yet. There are certain people who are realizing it, but it's such a small kind of group who are talking about it. Yeah, there's a modern anthropologist who I love and respect a lot. I've never met her. We've only exchanged emails, Tanya Luhrmann. And she did a study of the treatment of psychosis in San Mateo, California, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. Now, we spend over 1,000 times as much money on each florid psychotic episode. Guess who gets the worst results? The ones who spend the most? Yeah, we do. And the sick thing about this, we are busy exporting our methods and destroying their traditional ways of dealing with psychosis. You got to laugh or cry. I mean, it's just... Yeah.
Yeah. What are we doing?
Yeah, and she says something else that's become really, really important to me. She says, in the West, we have what she calls a citadel model of mind. We've come to believe that our mind is private, it's contained, everything inside it is our property, and nothing else gets in or out. Mm-hmm. And she says, this looks strong, but it's actually incredibly fragile because it's so brittle. You hear one voice and you just think, my brain's broken, I'm toast, you know? Mm-hmm. And she said she believed that the reason Ghana and India got better results is they had different models of the self. She called the one in Ghana the cosmocentric model of the mind. They saw their mind as something that emerged out of nature and developed with nature. And so, of course, you should expect interaction to come in and out. In India, she said it's a sociocentric model of the self. And, they expect, with this one woman who heard voices, that said, oh, that's just like my aunt. She was always nagging. Mm-hmm. It's not, oh, shit, my brain's broken. They could accept it. And so I think that's become a super important idea. I think, the thing Dick has really explored is the idea of multiplicity. We are multiple beings. We're not one unified smoothie. We're all these different things. We're much more like a soccer team than a tennis player. Mm-hmm. How we function in the world. And that's a good thing. It works much better.
Yeah.
And then he also, this idea of self is really important for his. But I think the step beyond this, not only are we multiple, our minds are porous. We interact with the environment and others around us in all sorts of ways we work really hard to ignore. And if you accept every living system is porous.
Why should we be any different, right?
Yeah. It's once you step back and go, holy, what? It's ridiculous. But, like David Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy, he said this idea of this, he calls it the myth of the solo self. Mm-hmm. He said that's so deeply built into our language, we are not able to think about this issue clearly.
Yeah.
And he's trying to invent new language. It's very awkward, but he may be right. And so I think for me, that's more what I'm exploring now. The porosity of mind. What does that mean for healing and how we heal? And I think psychedelics vastly increase this porosity of mind, make it pretty hard to ignore sometimes, mm-hmm. which I think is a really good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. It's hard with the language, right? Like you said, it's kind of like a holdover from the Enlightenment, man separate from nature, this single enclosed autonomous unit, and the whole goal is to become like a sovereign self and all of that stuff, right? Like Jung tried it, capital S self, which is like awkward because you always have to say, I'm talking about the capital S self, and it's. And when you talk to people from other cultures, I think one of the things that gets lost in translation sometimes is like in, say, Hinduism, in the Upanishads, when they talk about the self, what they're talking about is something completely different from what we mean when we say self. Or when the Buddhists talk about mind, chitta, they're talking about something completely different. They're talking about a complex of the mind, heart, and body, something like that. And so we have to upgrade our thinking and our language around this if we're going to get there.
Yeah. And a lot of people from many different fields have seen this, but they're not talking to each other. Like Tanya Luhrmann sees this very clearly, and she's done a lot of great research on psychosis and spirituality all over the world. And there's a woman, Isabel Clarke, who's a psychologist in England who works with inpatient psychotics. She came up with almost an identical theory. She calls it the billiard ball theory of mind. And she says, this conception we have is a root cause of all the distress of these psychotics. Same idea, same conclusions. They don't reference each other at all. And D.H. Lawrence understood this brilliantly and expressed it poetically with great power. But, the psychologists and anthropologists don't talk about D.H. Lawrence. And I could mention at least half a dozen more people who all see this same thing. And I just think when these people start getting together, all these little sparks are going to ignite a fire, which really could, hopefully, I'm being a little Pollyanna-ish, trigger a big change in consciousness for a lot of people.
Well, I think even that people are creating their own, kind of revised systems within their own silos. That's also like a hangover of like the neoliberal focus on the individual and all of that. And like, we're not kind of like at a place where we're collaborating really well across disciplines or even within this discipline, because, I've got to like own my thing so I can sell it and, pay the rent on my place. And it's tough.
Yep. And sadly, the IFS has become so popular that the IFS world is getting like that. There's money in it now, and people are elbowing each other aside and stepping on each other. And I guess it happens with everything, but it's sad.
Yeah. How does that, well, speaking of psychosis, I'm interested to hear how IFS views psychosis. Is it like a part kind of going rogue and taking over, or do you see it maybe as something else coming in?
I shouldn't try and speak for the official IFS world.
Well, what's your approach to working with psychosis in parts work?
Okay, I'm going to have to back up a little for this. There are parts which are part of our own psyche, and we come that way. We come, when we're born, a lot of these parts they're sort of like software programs that come online at certain ages. And, like learning language comes online at a year and a half, usually turns off again in our teenage years. It's in there. It's a module. A bit just soft. We have many like that. So we come like that. When people get traumatized, and everybody experiences some kind of trauma, the parts get further separated. So there are all these parts that come from our own personal lifetime. So we work with them, we start getting beyond that. And then there are parts that are not from our personal lifetime at all. Some come from our families and our ancestors. And there's hard science behind this now, epigenetics, and we could go into the Diaz-Ressler experiment, which I think demonstrates this unequivocally, But then there are things in there we meet that are not from our family, they're not part of us, and yet they can have huge impacts on us for good or bad. And these are the things that I've been focusing on. In IFS, the negative ones are called unattached burdens, and the positive ones are called guides. Mm-hmm. And they're very specific ways of working with these beings. And very often, I think psychosis is when the unattached burdens have pretty much gotten control or are dominating a person to a large degree. Mm-hmm. That would be my understanding of a lot of it.
It's interesting, like even in the language, the ones who are benevolent, helpful, we personify as guides. The other stuff, unattached burdens. I mean, it sounds like we're talking about some luggage.
Yeah. And, Dick originally called these things critters.
Yeah, which I thought it was too cutesy.
Yeah, well, he didn't want people to be scared of him.
Well, you should be sometimes.
When you're not scared of these things, even the most horrendous demon, it can't hurt you. Mm. And that's a very hard thing to tell people who are trembling in the corner of the room,
Yeah.
But I don't like that name either. I think it's not really honest. It's something that was said so that in his hope that this would be academically acceptable, I think.
Right.
You could talk about unattached burdens in a grad school, you know. And when I used, the subtitle of my book on this subject, it says spirit possession in there, and he was angry at me for putting that in the subtitle. And
yeah, I thought you were really taking a real step forward, and I appreciate the courage around that because, like it or not, that's what the experience is like. And whether that's ontologically what's going on or whatever, but sometimes it feels like you've been possessed by something.
Yep. And what I say, because a lot of that book was compiling huge amounts of evidence with, there's like 32 pages of references. I wanted to document this because it's so controversial. What was I gonna? The important thing is how we relate to them. And one of the things I say that usually quiets the skeptics, at least for a few minutes, is that there is some kind of basic biopsychological dynamic. It happens in pretty much every culture we have records of. It's one of the most widely distributed cultural traits. It happens in every era of history we have records of, and it can have huge impacts on people's lives for good or bad. The metaphor most often used to describe this is spirit possession. Whatever it is, it's worthy of study. I think that's kind of hard to argue with.
Yeah, I know. Billions of people. Can they really all be wrong?
Yeah, billions of people for millennia.
Over time, yeah. Including
the planet.
Yeah, including your own ancestors.
Yeah.
Right? No matter where you're from or, what kind of heritage you claim, down the line, your ancestors believed in this.
Yeah. Well, even today in America, like the Pew studies and the Gallup studies, half the people believe in ghosts. Something like 30-40% say they've met them and talked to them. And this idea that hearing voices is pathology. Not long ago, if you admitted to hearing voices, that was enough to get you confined in a mental institution. And there's one study, for instance, of couples who'd been married more than 40 years, and one of the couple died. 80% of the surviving spouses hear voices of the deceased one. It's not abnormal. It's not weird. It's not mental illness. It's a part of the human experience. And it's just very frightening to the tight sphincters in academia.
Yeah, because they don't know what to do with it. They don't have the techniques or tools to deal with it.
And if you take it seriously, it completely explodes their worldview. They don't have ground to stand on anymore.
Going back to psychosis, so allowing that, for the porosity of the mind, that things can come in from outside of us or from somewhere down the ancestral line, then, how do we then work with that part once we've identified it?
Okay. You dialogue with it. I think the word dialogue is really important. You talk with it. You find out why it's here and one of the most basic rules about these things from IFS, and I think Dick is right. He and I disagree about a lot, but I think he's 100% right on this one. These things only get power in us when they can scare us. Sort of a corollary of that is they're really good at scaring us. They know our most tender little baby parts in there, and they can poke them. So when somebody has a large energy like this in them, I start asking them, are there any parts of you who are scared of this thing? And then we slowly and patiently help that person develop a relationship with the part of them who's scared of it, get well connected to the person's self, and then it's no longer afraid. And when you've done that with all the parts who got tangled in this thing, then it has to leave. And I don't try to, my approach to these things is not at all confrontive. I think most of them are lost, desperate, suffering beings who are clinging here because they don't know where to go and they're starving. So they get into people and try and feed on the people they're in. So I try and help them go where they belong, where they can heal. And I try and use whatever the person's, religious imagery or ideology is. And if they don't have any, I try and offer them something as sort of blank as I can so that their inner system can, use that. But it's not this exorcism battle of the spiritual hero versus the bad guy.
Casting them out and in the name of...
No. Yeah, it's more like you're lost. You're suffering horribly. I can prove that to you, and I can show you a way to a much better life.
Yeah, interesting. When I was 16, after going through some pretty heavy trauma, I opened myself up in a kind of altered state, and something came in me. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was in my mid-30s working within one of these psychedelic churches, the Santo Daime, who work a lot with mediumship and taking these suffering beings into the light. That's their way of working with them, where it all kind of came full circle. And I remembered the event that happened when I was 16 and what that being actually had kind of caused me to do, which was like really the drinking heavy, the indiscriminate drug use, the, looking for altered states and feeling all the excitement and aliveness that I would have in those states. And what ended up happening in the context of a ceremony was once I had identified this and seen this pattern over time, it was a kind of like a negotiation with this entity and actually thanking it because it had come to me. I had unconsciously invited it in to help protect me. Yeah. And its power was the power of the sharp tongue, which could keep people at a distance. Because if people were at a distance, I couldn't get hurt the way I was hurt previously. And so it all came to me in this kind of like in a flash. This is what it actually gave me. And it kind of overstayed its welcome to the point where I wanted people to get close to me again. And so I wanted to get this under control, and I didn't want to keep people at a distance, right? So it was a kind of a experience of like thanking it and also asking it to move along. Mm-hmm. Like you're no longer needed, you're no longer helping, but I thank you for helping me when I called on you.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a lot of people who come to me have similar stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think when we ask these beings to move along, it's also good for them. Mm-hmm. There's places they can go where they'll be a lot happier and they'll be able to heal and grow. And I'm glad you mentioned Santo Daime, because it's Brazilian, and the spiritists of Brazil know a great deal about this. And there are over 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil that have spiritist healing teams as part of their program. So they're actively working with these kinds of beings as part of the psychotic process. They're way ahead of us in the, quote, developed world.
Yeah. Well, the Brazilians are so open to syncretism, of like mixing things up, blending things. Like it's like whatever works, we're going to use it, we're going to incorporate it, and maybe we'll call it something new. Or they're so open to that. Their minds are very porous. Like they haven't been like fully colonized like us here in the Northwest. Regions seem to be. Yeah.
Well, that brings up a very interesting point. I think that some of my friends among the Sioux brought up. When you have this sort of citadel model of mind, or even worse, the Freudian ego, like what Freudian, I don't like Freud, but what his method is basically, it's the ego colonizing the rest of the mind. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that modern psychiatry and psychology flourished about the same time imperialism was at its peak. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a colonialist attitude towards the depths of our own being.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like what you're calling the porous mind, I call the decolonized mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that you can allow all these beings a place in, I call it the inner council. And like everybody gets a say. And, there's one central figure, which we could call the inner elder or the inner king, however you want to describe it, that calls the council into order, and wants to hear from everyone and then make a decision based on all of those voices and all that input. So I think IFS would call that the core self.
Yeah, or just self. They call it self with a capital S, which is also very awkward. I think we should call it the big wazoo.
Yeah, well, for example, one of my favorites, the Grand Wazoo.
Yeah, yeah. There was a guy back in the 60s who founded this, psychedelic church, and he called himself the Chief Boo-Hoo.
Just picking some goofy name, yeah. You gotta call me something.
Yeah.
So you've been working with people who are involved in working with psychedelics, whether in a ceremonial or a clinical context?
For a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me that that work could really benefit from, I advocate for a depth psychological approach, but also I think IFS comes as a maybe more coherent system that would be easier for people to integrate into their practice, right? So I think it has a lot of benefit there. Is it being taken up by these practitioners?
I think so. I do a fair number of trainings, and it's quite different. Okay, let's switch into this. I think the real work for people who are helping others with psychedelics comes in the preparation and the integration. During the experience itself, we should get the hell out of the way, follow the medicine, listen to the medicine, have faith that the people have what did Groff call it? Inner healing intelligence?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And just let that work and get the hell out of the way and get our egos, get back there. Yeah. But in the preparation and integration, I think we can make a huge difference. And the one thing I think IFS, and I don't know, other people do it really different. I'm just speaking for Bob.
Yeah.
This old fart in Santa Cruz, here's what he does. I think the preparation should be all about getting permission from all the parts of the person to do the medicine.
Interesting.
Because very often there's some part that's going, this is really stupid. Don't do this. Fuck you. And
or I'm scared to death.
Is scared to death. All this stuff. If you go into a medicine experience with that kind of split and one part feeling it's been squashed down in the basement, this isn't going to be good. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of structured ways we can help welcome out all the parts who are having any problem with this. And, we don't need a whoopee, this sounds great. All we need is like a sullen adolescent going, oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. One time, that's all we need. But we need that. Without that, I wouldn't give anyone medicine. I mean,
that's interesting. The usual approach is, I would say, an egoic approach. It's like, figure out what your intention is.
Yes, I hate that.
Yeah, and I would, like Hillman would call that like Captain Ego, going in and kind of trying to direct things. But I like this idea. Get all the parts on board to some degree.
Yeah. And then you could set an intention if everybody's on board, and then check if everyone's on board with the intention. But in IFS language, we don't have, there isn't an ego. Ego would be the group of managers who usually runs your life. Mm-hmm. People who get you up in the morning to go to work and all. We need them. They're not bad. They're not wrong. And I don't like people trashing the ego all the time because we really need that. But,
it's who we are in the world.
yeah. You want to eat? It's pretty good to have an ego.
Or you want to have a relationship? You got to have an ego. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to be trashing that.
But what's the state of your ego? That's the question, right? Like, is it in a healthy state or?
Yeah. If you have your ego set up an intention, it's going to go into the medicine experience thinking, I got this, I'm in control. And the first thing the medicine is going to do, if it's a reasonable dose, it's just going to wipe that out. It's just going to blow that poor bunch of parts away. Now, at the end of the experience, they're very likely to be pissed off at you for setting them up like this.
The other parts, you mean?
No, the ego, because
I see.
You said, "Oh, here, set an intention. You're in charge," and then you give it this medicine, which just wipes, blows it away. Mm-hmm. Gonna feel like, boy, I don't like this, and so I think that's another reason I think it's a big mistake. Mm-hmm. So we could spend a whole 90 minutes just on preparation.
Preparation, yeah. I would guess that in this model and approach that if there are parts, like inevitably there's going to be some parts that are just scared shitless of like losing control, of embarrassing themselves, of like the experience being too much for them to handle, all of that. So I would imagine that part of the preparation would be finding parts who feel like strong enough that they can take over if need be to do whatever to navigate the experience. Something like that.
I wouldn't do that.
No?
Because that you're calling, those parts would be manager parts who thought they could come over. I'd work with all the parts who were afraid of dissolving. Mm-hmm. They were, okay, maybe we could dissolve.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think it's a mistake to try and get managers involved with psychedelics.
I would see. Here's some of the language, right? I would say it'd be more of like a protector part, or
a manager is a kind of protector. There are two kinds of protectors: managers and firefighters. We don't want them trying to run the trip.
Okay. Even firefighter doesn't speak to me because the firefighter is going to put out a fire that has started.
Yeah, well, that's what firefighters are like an addiction. And if what a firefighter is doing, somebody's starting to feel overwhelming emotion, the firefighter comes in, I'm going to get this SOB drunk. So I don't feel that anymore. I don't care what the damage is. I don't care. Collateral damage, who cares? We need to put that out. We need to stop those feelings.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So that's the idea. And both managers and firefighters are protectors. They basically have that kind of function.
Yeah, so your approach is to go in without any of those online that might kind of block or try to over-direct the experience. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, great.
There's a metaphor that I stole from the Imperial College of London where Robin Carhart Harris was working. And he said, there's a lot of talk in, the quote, scientific psychedelic people about rumination and thought loops and habit, and he said most people's minds, they're like a ski slope where everyone's been skiing down these same paths. And it's hard to impossible to get out of those old paths because they're dug so deep. Mm-hmm. And he says a psychedelic experience is like a fresh snowfall. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, the mountain is this beautiful virgin expanse with all these different possibilities, and it routinizes the rumination patterns, the thought perseveration patterns. Mm-hmm. So, if this is right, and I believe this is profoundly right, and this is why we need to get managers out of the way to allow this fresh, new virgin snowfall to cover the mountainside. Mm-hmm. It implies that we need to start the integration very quickly after the experience. Because if we're not available very, very quickly, most natural response, they're going to start going down the old trails again. Mm-hmm. So I think people should start the integration the evening of the experience or at the very latest the next morning. And most people say, I'll see you in a week, or, I think that's a big mistake. We really need to help people not go back into the old rumination patterns. So that's another thing I would hope people would experiment with doing differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. In the afterglow, when you're in a kind of, it's kind of like being in a hypnagogic state. Like you're kind of 1 foot in the experience, 1 foot out. I think that's like the place where you want to start working with the contents of the experience. Yeah.
Somebody joked to me, the most important therapeutic window in most psychedelic experiences is given to the Uber driver on the way home.
Oh, God. I guess if you're doing it in a city or something, geez, I can think of better people to work with for integration.
Yeah, but it also makes sense to me, because if you've been sitting with someone 5 hours, 8 hours, you're tired. You don't want to put in another couple hours, or many people don't. So that's why I say the next morning at least.
Yeah.
One other thing I want to say about this.
Yeah.
This idea of not getting the protectors to try and set up the trip and set intention, and getting permission from everyone beforehand. There's a lot of people talk about Suicide Tuesday, and after an MDMA experience, people 48 hours later usually get way down. And I found that when people are really, really careful about getting permission from all the protectors, there's almost none of that reactive depression. I think that reactive depression was primarily protectors getting back online and going, you blew me out of the water, I'm gonna fuck you up. Basically their attitude. Understandable.
Yeah.
So I think if you really do this gentle and thorough preparation, you won't have that kind of reactive depression.
Yeah, I can see that. Like the party's like, oh, you want to get high? Well, I'm going to make you really low for the next couple days, right? I'm going to like put your face in the dirt.
Yeah, you pushed me aside. Well, I can push you aside.
Yeah, the fall of Icarus. Yeah. Well, this like the thing from Robin Carhart Harris. That sounds so ideal. That after my psychedelic experience, it's like there's a fresh snow. There's like I'm open to all these possibilities. All of the ruts that I've been in are kind of filled in now. I can do anything. So often, people after these experiences, in extreme cases, they feel like something came into them, and it's a persistent voice that is telling them to kill themselves or do other harmful things. So when it's a very different scenario than like the fresh snowfall, right? Like you've just been thrown into a storm, kind of. And so, like, is IFS, is it helpful in those cases? Do you work with any kind of pharmaceuticals to help you get people to more of a baseline before you can do the IFS? Or what's your approach when working with extreme cases?
I work with that directly, and I get a lot of that. Because there are all these people who want the exciting, dramatic, and fun part of sitting with someone, but they don't want to clean up the messes.
Right.
I'm perfectly happy cleaning up the messes and being, if we take this seriously, that there are these independent beings, traditionally called spirit possession events, psychedelics make the boundaries of the mind, the membranes around us, much more permeable. So these things are very likely to get in, especially, I think, with ayahuasca. Because it's typically group ceremonies, and you just can't control that as well as if you've got one or two people sitting with one individual. There's all these energies loose in that room. And very often nasty energies get into people. But when we can, help them get out. But it's, this whole thing of dealing with, basically in IFS language, dealing with an unattached burden. Mm-hmm. I think guides get into people too, very, very often. And I want to point out, we could go back to unattached burdens because that's a large part of my work now. Because most other therapists don't want to touch it, and so I get a lot of referrals.
Right.
Good for research, but
Yeah, I'm one of those guys too. I get the call after they've gone to the CBT person or whatever, and okay, I need some help. And you talk about shamanism and all this stuff. You might be able to help me. You might think I'm crazy, and I'm like, nope. This is a place where you can talk about it as if it's real because it feels real.
It is real.
Yeah.
I would, personally, I go beyond it. It seems I go. This is real.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, only the most strident materialist would say that it's not real, because even if it exists only, quote unquote, only in our psyche, well, isn't that an aspect of reality? So let's just call it real, okay? Yeah. Can we just get over it?
Yeah, and it totally changes people's lives.
Yeah, there's a real effect, Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
I'm a big fan of William James and his idea of radical pragmatism. What works is what's real.
Yeah.
Instead, that's a great definition of reality. I want to tell you a story about a woman I worked with. She went to an ayahuasca ceremony and she knew it wasn't going to be run well, but she did it anyway. And
some reckless part of her was just like, I don't care, I need change.
Yeah. And driving home from that, which wasn't far, she doesn't know what happened, but she didn't make it home. She ended up in a locked psychiatric ward.
Oh, gosh.
Florid psychotic episode. She was in California. Her parents come to get her from the Midwest. Driving her home to the Midwest, they have to stop and re-hospitalize her 3-4 times.
Oh, my God.
She would try and jump out of the car on the freeway. She would attack them and try and strangle the driver.
Yeah.
Intense florid psychotic episodes. She gets home and she has this cousin or something who's a psychic. And the woman says to her, next time that thing comes, you feel this, just start saying to it, I have nothing here for you but love. I have nothing here for you but love, as a mantra. Keep doing that. And the woman did it, and the thing disappeared and didn't come back. And that was the end of her florid psychotic episode.
Wow.
And she came to me like weeks later, just, Bob, what the hell happened? What was that? We looked at, parts who were still afraid and, worked with it some more. And I said to her, well, these nasty things do seem to be allergic to love. And she said, Bob, I think it was just having somebody realize that something that wasn't a part of me could get into my mind was incredibly healing.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, opening up her own framework to allow for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what official Western mental health people refuse to do, which is so infuriating.
Yeah. Well, there are people working kind of outside the system who are there to help people pick up the pieces and put it back together, and all of that. So it's just it's a shame that people do have to kind of, well, I don't know, is it a shame or is it just the way it is that people got to venture off the beaten path and go searching for somebody else? Yeah. As long as there's people out there doing the work, right?
Yeah, they're not enough. And all the money and insurance money and all that goes into the stuff that doesn't really work and actively damages these people.
Yeah.
And I just saw the MDMA thing by MAPS got turned down. Like 40 years of careful research. It's sickening.
Yeah, well, I guess there's some valid critique about the way they went about it and the nature of MAPS organization and things. So I don't know. Maybe like we always need renegade practitioners. It's like the shaman always lived just on the outskirts of the village because they were maybe a little too wild to be like in the middle of the village, and so they also needed some isolation. They needed to be separate from the kind of group mind, and so part of the function you got to be an outsider.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've always preferred being in the counterculture.
Yeah, me too.
So boring over there.
I know. Here we can have like open conversations about what we really experience and include like all of the, the wild stuff in life. Yeah, it's just much more rich and interesting. Mm-hmm. So then when you're working in integration, so following an experience like that, that's not maybe so like an acute psychosis where it's like, I had some insights or I had this experience. What does that look like in your approach to IFS?
Okay, I need to go into the IFS language a little bit.
That's okay.
All these parts from our own personal lifetime. There's this layer called protectors, managers, and firefighters. We've talked about that some. And then beneath, behind, under, whatever you want to think, there's also these exiles. And this would be the classic wounded child, that has gotten, a lot of people talk about these days. Mm-hmm. And typically some younger part who's carrying a tremendous amount of pain. Pain, shame, all abuse memories, all sorts of stuff is carried by those exiles. So there's two things I think, that I want to focus on primarily in terms of integration. I don't want, a lot of times those exiles will just come up on their own during a psychedelic experience and find some healing and some acceptance. And that's wonderful. We don't want them getting re-exiled, getting shoved back down into some psychic basement and getting a lid put on their experience again because it's too painful and scary. So don't re-exile the exiles. The number two thing is the managers, usually when exiles start getting free, a big fear of the managers is, oh shit, I lost my job. They're going to get rid of me now.
Mm-hmm. I see.
I'm not needed here anymore. Oh, this is bad. So we need to help the managers get new roles that are bigger. And we need to get the managers to understand that they're actually long overdue for a promotion. Mm-hmm. They were stuck in sort of a nasty job and ask questions like, what would you like to do if you were really free and could have the most fulfilling and deep and wonderful job? Instead of, oh, I don't have anything to do anymore. I'm superfluous. They're going to get rid of me. So to turn that around 180 degrees for the managers. In IFS language, those would be the two primary things I'd be working on. And I'd also try and get myself the hell out of the way and listen to the client. And, follow their language and their experience. And, in some ways I have way too many theories and words, and I want the theories to be held really, really lightly. Mm-hmm. These are sort of general directions I would like to make sure are covered rather than, I know what's right here. I don't.
Yeah. And we've got to check the boxes and no. And I think allow most of the words and the language to come from the client.
That is so, so, so important. Learn the client's language. I've worked in China, Korea, Pakistan, all over the place. Learn the client's language. In Pakistan, we talk about jinn.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if you do that, if you adapt to someone's cultural background or their spiritual beliefs.
Totally.
Good.
I want to tell a story about that. Milton Erickson was the psychiatrist and probably greatest hypnotherapist ever. And I think he was a shaman, but he would never admit or say that. And he worked he's dead, but he worked inpatient for much of his career in wards for psychotics. And he went on this new ward, and there was a guy who, for many years, all they could do with him, the nurses would feed him, get him out of bed, stand him in the hallway, and he'd start talking word salad. And he wouldn't move. He'd just talk word salad all day long. So Dr. Erickson comes on the ward, and after a few days, he had a little extra time. So he goes over to the guy, and he starts writing down the word salad. And he studies the guy's word salad, his made-up words, his grammar, how he does that. And then he starts going next to the guy and just talking word salad back to him, shoulder to shoulder, no eye contact, just talking word salad back. After only a couple of days, the guy turns toward him in the middle of the word salad and says, "Cut it out, Doc." And then snaps back into the word salad. Now, Dr. Erickson, just by learning that man's language, broke through a multi-year total isolation.
Right, yeah. Even that telling them to shut up was a breakthrough. It was interaction with another human, acknowledging them.
Yes, yes, that's an immense breakthrough.
Wow.
And just in a couple days.
Yeah.
Without any fancy theories, Dr. Erickson didn't stick any of his theories or big words in there. He listened to the patient.
Oh, great. Hey, can we take a little minute break? I'm just going to run to the bathroom.
Okay.
Then we can wrap it up.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks. That's a wild synchronicity. I was just reading about Erickson and his approach to hypnotherapy this morning. I was looking, who was it? I can't even remember how I got there, but I'm always kind of curious about modalities that are more widely accepted than let's say shamanism, where you can kind of do shamanic work. You know what I mean? So I came across his work and I was thinking, wow, this is really interesting. I mean, he's calling it hypnotherapy, but you could also call it shamanic trance work or something.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. He would never admit that.
No, of course not. But even I was reading about one of his moves or one of his techniques being confusion. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, there's a lot of trickster energy even in this, which is part of the shamanic archetype.
There's a great film about him called The Wizard of the Desert.
Oh, awesome title.
Yeah, because in the last years of his life, he lived in Arizona because he had post-polio syndrome. And people from all over the country would send him their impossible clients. And in a weekend or a few visits, he would usually turn them around. I mean, and then all these therapists went to study with him because he kept one after another doing these amazing, like with that guy in the hall of this hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of similar, I think, maybe in that way to R.D. Laing, where it's meeting the client where they're at and learning about their language and going into their world. Yeah. Rather than trying to drag them into our world of consensus reality, right?
Oh, yeah, and you think of, we totally discount the fantastic visionary experience that many people have in psychotic episodes. Mm-hmm. And we tell them the most vivid and powerful emotional experiences of your life are absolutely meaningless. They're the product of a broken brain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's crap. That's poison. That's cursing that poor person.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to get your take on this. When I've worked with people who have had quote unquote psychotic break or a period of psychosis, I guess what I've learned to look for is what was it that was needing to come through to assert itself within your psyche, and what function does it have? So I think the idea of looking at the symptom in a positive way, or it's the psyche trying to make something happen, and if you ignore it too long, it's going to break through with some really disruptive force. Do you look at it in a similar way?
Sometimes I think people are possessed by very negative forces, and I help them deal with that. But even that, there's so much people can learn from that kind of experience. It might end up being a very powerful, positive episode in their lives. I want to just mention one little story. I think it was Tanya Luhrmann who told this, but I'm not sure. There was a young guy in the West who florid psychotic episode, hospitalized, stabilized, and then the psychiatrist tells him, you got schizophrenia, you got a broken brain, there's no cure for this, take these meds for the rest of your life, expect a miserable little life, and these meds are going to turn your brain into a jellyfish in about 10 years.
Yeah, and you're going to gain 100 pounds and all the rest of it,
Yeah, really destroy you. Sorry. This is incurable. Instead of, I don't know how to help you, this is incurable. That pisses me off. Young woman in Thailand, florid psychotic episode, hospitalized, stabilized with drugs. They get her off the drugs. She talks to her people. They say, oh, we're so sorry. You've been given a very difficult life, a very difficult life. You are in the front lines of the cosmic battle between good and evil. If you fight well, you will be able to help many others who are in your position. Yeah. And you know what happens to the guy in the West? He just goes downhill. Both of them continue to have recurrent florid psychotic episodes, but the woman in Thailand has a meaningful life that's meaningful to her, and she is able to help many other people. The guy in the West is destroyed. And we're so arrogant. Many Western psychiatrists would tell that woman in Thailand, there is no cosmic battle between good and evil. That's a delusion. And
and you're suffering from egoic inflation and all the rest of it.
Yeah, poison. That's poison given to a person out of arrogance instead of helping them.
Yeah, again, just it's a matter of context.
Yeah, listen to the one, and they're doing better than we are. It's like, God.
Yeah, and I'm sure like that woman too would receive kind of ongoing counsel or mentorship in being one of these chosen people who's dealt a difficult role. So here's, your auntie who also was chosen for this, and she's going to help guide you through it. Yeah. Rather than therapize it away or drug it away.
We need our visionaries. And most of our visionaries are now locked up in psychotic wards and drugged into vegetables. We need the most wild, creative, inventive, out there thoughts to open up the cognitive space around us so that we can really grow as a species. And our attitude toward calling these things a mental illness destroys our potential to grow, I think, or really cripples it, doesn't destroy it.
Yeah.
Mental illness is the whole idea of mental illness is a Western cultural construct. It's not some biological given at all. It's a cultural construct. And a lot of anthropologists, when they talk about something like this in other cultures, they talk about the idiom of distress because they don't want to impose this idea of mental illness on all the other cultures. So there's a lot of problems with Western mental health. Yeah.
And just going off of what you're saying about needing the visionaries, the best and brightest of the Western mind of the Western world, best and brightest minds of the Western world have been working long and hard to solve the problems around, war, famine, climate crisis, all of that, and things are just getting worse. So maybe we need like a radical new vision or a kind of reclamation of an older vision.
Yep.
Going forward.
There's a famous philosopher named Owen Barfield who was a really good friend of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien at Oxford. He talked about there was an original participation. We had this interactive relationship with the world and with others. Then there's been this separation, and he says we need a final participation, which we will reintegrate and I think of this in terms of the porous mind idea. And he says, we're not going to go back here. We're going to combine these two and create something new that's bigger than both of them if we don't destroy ourselves and wipe us off the planet in this separation phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I heard Owen's Barfield's conception of that, it was something I was trying to reach toward myself, because within myself I had felt a split. There was my mind that I used to navigate the world, where all that received knowledge from my schooling and cultural conditioning and everything, where that was functioning. And then I had, ever since I was a kid, with wild dreams and ecstatic states and then psychedelic states, all of that, I had this other mind that would be online, where it was open to the kind of the mythic quality of the world, or the magical quality of the world. And, it's like, I got to reconcile these two. They have to coexist, because they're equally real and valid and all of that, and I don't want to lose one or the other. So is there some kind of bridge or a something so that they become more integrated? And all I had to do really was to allow for both to coexist, and notice that maybe I shift between them at certain times. Ritual brings me into the mythic imagination, or and so I'm okay with that right now. I don't know if that is the third, is just allowing for both. It's like the alchemical idea of the two becomes the three.
Yeah. What I think more and more, the brightest, most advanced minds on our planet, we're not even in kindergarten yet. We're still in diapers. We know almost nothing. The vast expanse of our ignorance is truly mind-boggling. And all these people are going, oh, we got this wired. Theory of everything right around the corner. We know.
Yeah.
It's
hilarious.
We're so ignorant. There's this one wonderful image from W.B. Yeats, the poet. He said, everything humans know, and perhaps can know, is one little bubble with that beautiful iridescent sheen. That bubble is one of many bubbles in a small patch of sea foam, on a small beach, on part of an insignificant cove on a vast, dark sea.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's about the limits of our knowledge, I think, right now, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it is this kind of Western arrogance, right? That everything has been progressing to this point, and we're at the pinnacle of human knowledge and all of that. And I'm like, the whole Enlightenment thing, it's a very short-lived experiment so far, and it ain't working. So maybe
we are in an epidemic of mental illness, and the mental health system we have now is a failure. I mean, I could be a little more polite and say is failing, but it's a failure.
Yeah.
It ain't working, gang.
Well, I would say that the mental health system is suffering the greatest illness, of small-mindedness, or its own kind of inflation, thinking that we've got all the answers.
Yep.
That's why I liked Hillman, he kind of got out of it, and then so he could critique it from the outside. And he would say that he's applying the practice of therapy to psychotherapy itself, and putting it under analysis.
Mm-hmm. And something else he said that I just love: most modern psychology is an attempt to kill the psyche.
Yeah, right. And you would say kill off all the parts except for that one singular self, right? Undivisible.
Or the gang of managers who's usually running your show. I know we got to quit really soon. I just wanted to say that I've got a website, robertfalconer.us, and there's all sorts of free stuff there, and there's a YouTube channel, and blah, 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 blah. Lots.
Well, and you've got the recent book too, right? Which goes into more deeply the ideas around the porous mind and spirit possession, and working with an expanded IFS model.
Yeah, the others within us.
Great. And you're doing trainings coming up?
Well, I'm always doing some stuff. There's three free things I am doing in the next few weeks. One's a psychedelic summit. Another one's the Future of Consciousness summit. And another one is Monday. Oh, it's just a couple of days away. I better
get cracking.
And that's for a group in Berlin that I really like. It's a 12-step group. It's applying IFS to the 12 steps.
I mean, I was going to ask you about working with addiction in IFS. You got like a kind of a short thing you could say about that?
I think IFS is great with addiction, but they're, oh boy, I spent many, many years on this. So addictions are always a polarization. There's some part, for example, that wants to get drunk, and there's another part that's going, "You asshole! You're gonna destroy our life."
Yeah.
And it's wham, 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 and that's what their person's life is like. Now, if that's all there was in a person, it would be hopeless, which is what they feel like when they come in your office. This is hopeless. I've just got this going on. But that's not all there is in the person's system. There's also self, which is very like Jung's self, this, compassionate, kind, curious being. And there are also exiles. There's deep pain under this battle. So the basic model would be you don't engage this battle directly. As opposed, most systems, they want you to go to the one who wants to drink, and they want to help jail that. The way I work with them is I want to go to this part that's been criticizing the drinker and say, hey, could you lay off for a little while? Because you just piss this guy off and he drinks more. Yeah. And then you work with the self-part relationship between each side of this, and then you get their permissions. Hey, I think you're both protecting somebody more vulnerable in a lot of pain behind you. Would you be willing to let us go work with them? And then you won't be stuck in this role anymore. So,
yeah. In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yeah.
Well, even that, I think, anybody hearing that, where that sounds like, something clicks for them in that, and it feels like right, can follow up with your work and some of the conferences and stuff that you're doing down the road. Yeah. Well, this has been really great. I really enjoyed talking with you, and thanks for opening up my conception of IFS and recognizing that there are people who are expanding it and letting it be more adaptable and not so kind of, because I have a kind of allergy to systems, and especially like rigid systems and stuff, so it's nice to hear all this. I appreciate it, and it sounds like good work.
Yeah, great meeting you. I'd be glad to talk another time if you want later down the road.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks a lot.